Well, hi and welcome. I'm Lisa Fain, CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence, and I'm here actually in my capacity as ambassador to the International Mentoring Association Board for the continuation of our interview series with mentoring experts. And I'm so happy today to be here with John Gomez. So I want to tell you a little bit about him before we dig into our meaty conversation. Dr. Gomez is a professor of psychology in his 20th year of service at Our Lady of the Lake University, which is a Hispanic serving institution located in San Antonio, Texas in the US. He actively mentors undergraduate students, junior faculty members, and occasionally postdoctoral colleagues at the University of Texas Health Systems in San Antonio. His primary duties are teaching and mentoring undergrad students about self-preparation for grad school, providing them information materials for career readiness, and with special attention to college students' development of identity and purpose in life. His research focuses on OLLU's population of ethnic minority, Mexican American, lower income, and first-generation college students for whom national college dropout rates are especially high. Such important work. Dr. Gomez's interventions are informed by how this new university environment may hold achievement-oriented beliefs, practices, and values.
University professor, so most of my mentees are undergraduate students, so consider the developmental phase that they're in, 18 to 20-ish, moving into their early part of their career. Many of them are thinking about graduate school. Since my field is psychology, one cannot become a psychologist without going to graduate school. So this is a normal part of their expectations and a normal part of our conversations. A lot of the way I work with students really starts with empathy. And it really starts with remembering my mentors when I was coming up. I think so many of us start with that as a beginning. And then understanding the individual's needs and wants going forward. Now that's particularly interesting in a context where you have a Hispanic serving institution, an enormous number of low-income students, and an enormous number of first-generation students that I'm working with in particular. That guides my approach and everything that I do in working with all of the different groups that I mentor. Assertive mentoring, I found. Some of the research literature calls it directive mentoring. Some call it intrusive mentoring. That's one of my favorites. Us ask questions, but so many do not. One of the social differences that I see that's not talked about nowadays is introverts versus extroverts. In the interest of trying to reach everybody, I think we need to be aware that not everybody's going to knock on your door. The assertive outreach, I think, is important for a lot of reasons. Cultural differences. Working with a lot of Mexican American students, I myself am Mexican American, I find they tend to be intimidated, as I was when I was in college. And this takes us back to empathy. I was scared to approach my professors. They seemed too busy, too serious, too grown up to spend time with me, which, you know, when a mentor hears that, they're thinking that's ridiculous. But that's where the empathy starts, is understanding my door literally needs to be open so that I can even see them walking by and say, yes, I can wave to them so they can come in. They may be walking by and they're nervous. That's where it begins. So that assertiveness starts with recognizing they may defer, they may be intimidated, they may be frightened by us serious adults. I also have discovered that I tend to walk through the hallways staring at a piece of paper, looking down at the floor, which is something I need to stop. I'm a really busy, serious person, and I need to be aware of trying to be a little bit more approachable. That's a personal observation of my own. I think we need to be assertive with mentees because a lot of them don't know how important this information is. You don't realize, for example, in the college students that I work with, how what you're doing now has an influence 2 or 3 years down the road. An easy example that resonates with all of us, grade point average. Freshmen, sophomores need to understand that grade point average is really important, because if you come to me senior year and say, I'm thinking about pursuing a master's degree, and your grade point average is not at least a 3.0, which is a B average, at least, it's going to be a short conversation. And I almost wish I could say, I wish I talked to you 2 years ago. You know, so being assertive oftentimes means going to the freshmen, going to the sophomores and saying, let's talk. You need to know this information now. I'm not as useful to them later when I should be talking to them earlier. We need to be in their face and be assertive with them. And the last thing, of course, is college students. For those of you who don't have regular access to college students, they're in information overload. There's so much information coming to them that the phrase of filter and dismiss, the way that you read your Gmail, you filter and dismiss and filter and dismiss and filter and dismiss. Getting their attention proved to be a real challenge. Getting a piece of their time proved to be a real challenge. We would hold workshops that were poorly attended, for example. So a lot of my current research is about being assertive in their face for a whole number of different reasons, really. That assertiveness is a big piece. I do find one-on-one mentoring, it's not efficient. And when I say efficient, dealing with a large number of mentees, they all need some baseline information for self-preparation for the next stage of life. I tell everybody who listens, the sole point of college is to get ready for what comes next. Every student needs that message, but my office hours are limited. And I've spent many years, probably like a lot of mentors have, I've spent many years sitting down with one student and giving them my 45 minutes lecture of incredibly important information that I was given when I was in college. And when that meeting's over, I think to myself, boy, I sure wish a lot more people had heard what I just said, recognizing how important it is. So that dissemination of information became an important part of my research. How do we get the information out to more people than we're currently giving this information out to?
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that in just a second, but one of the things that I don't want to let fly by, because it's such an important and rich part of what you said, is it occurs to me as you're talking that really context is everything, right?
Yes.
And understanding the context in which your students and the mentees, right, are operating is so important. Whereas, you know, in the business world or for older adults, we might say, let them drive the relationship. That's a lot harder in the context when you understand the cultural context and you understand the life stage context of these students, right? So in order to, you know, you got to think about, do you want it to be, you know, according to the book of mentee driven, or do you want it to be effective? And how do you balance those two things? So that was really something powerful that I took away from what you said, John.
And I really, that's a great point. I think when you're dealing with recognizing the developmental stage of the mentee that you're working with is important. I do mentoring with postdocs, postdoctoral research scientists here at University of Texas Health Science Center. And they have very different needs. They also have far less time to sit with me for 45 minutes. So they have very different needs, very, very specific questions. They have the confidence, they know who they are. They already have PhDs. They're looking for their first job. And my first recognition with them is realizing that I'm mentoring them from postdoctoral research to their first professor job. That's a completely different ballgame than mentoring somebody from a freshman who's essentially a freshman in college, who's essentially a high school kid. Up to age about 22, 23, where they're an adult with a sense of identity and purpose and ready to begin their career, moving forward in their life. I think that what you're calling context, remember, I'm a clinical psychologist by background. So I think of this in terms of developmental needs that the person has. Context really, really is important, no doubt about that. Is this person, oftentimes the way we talk about culture is a little too general for me, whether we're talking about race or gender or sexual orientation, as much as understanding family, culture. When I'm dealing with a student and I'm talking about getting a master's degree, getting a doctoral degree, when I'm talking about where they want to be 5 years from now, and that student is currently working part or full time to make money that the household needs, I'm being insensitive by having a conversation that says, well, have you thought about moving out of state, across the country to go to graduate school? Have you thought about moving over here and doing this? Well, they know they need to take care of their little brothers and sisters for a few more years and keep bringing income into the household. So I really find our conversations of culture a little too broad. Context means understanding the mentee, where they are, all the way down to the household they live in. Family expectations, family culture.
Yeah, For sure, for sure. I think thinking about it in the specific instead of the general is super, super helpful.
Mhm.
So let's rewind, a couple minutes, and you talked about um, trying to create this efficiency, if you will, of kind of communicating more broadly. So I know you've done a bunch of research about online platforms. Talk a little bit about that and how you take it and still maintain this sort of important sense of empathy when you do this more broadly as well.
Yes, my current research is on creating online platforms, and I do this with college students, and I do this with the postdoctoral research scientists that I mentioned a moment ago in mentoring them. Um, this is about widely disseminating research as much as we possibly can. I think every mentor, particularly, I mentor differently now I'm 52 years old than I did when I was 32 years old, and I probably will mentor differently when I'm 62 years old, approaching the end of my career. But it's never too early to think about legacy and your knowledge, and you don't want your knowledge to fade away with you when you move on. Recording this information is one of the major messages that I'll give to any mentor who will listen, as mentors try to help mentors improve. Write it down, write it down. We experienced mentors already know what the first questions are. Those frequently asked questions are. Whatever context you're in, whether it's in a university and focusing on student development, whether it's in working in industry and business where you're helping people who are early in their career, thinking down the road and thinking into their future, you know what those first questions are. How do I get ahead in the company? That's a standard question. The question really is, how do I achieve the goals that I have for 3 to 5 years from now, once they define those goals? Sharing that information in an online platform occurred to me about 2 years ago, and I started doing this and discovered that it's really, really useful. This is, again, respecting students' time, respecting postdocs' time, whoever I happen to be working with, and meeting them where they're at. An online platform is available 24/7. I'm not. I have office hours. I like to say I'm not available 24/7, but my advice is, and it's sitting there and it's waiting there.
Yeah.
And it's usually more eloquent than I can be in a face-to-face conversation because I've had time to write it down. You know how sometimes you finish a conversation and you wish, oh, I wish I'd said
I wish
this.
I had said that. If only, yes.
If only I'd said, and it said it
Yeah.
that way. Oh, this is a wonderful example, an illustration. Well, we collect those over our experience as mentors, and we come up with these great stories. Well, share this, and these are the example of documents that I've put on websites. And I don't know if I can share screen, but I can certainly show these to you if you'd like. I can certainly give you access to anyone access to these to see how they work. But the idea is understanding your mentee, who you're working with, what are the common questions they have, and what are the common resources. So let me start with just a simple example that you can extrapolate from. What do I want to be when I grow up? Is the most common question that I get from an 18, 19-year-old. Now, they may not say it that way. I say it that way jokingly, and they laugh. But what do they want to be doing 3 to 5 years from now? What's their goal? Well, first thing they need to know is, well, what are all the options? What are all my choices? There are websites, there are documents, there's information. Most professional organizations, let me use my example of the American Psychological Association, has an enormous number of career resources available for how to advance within the profession. Why we should all be making this available to our mentees to understand pre-prepared documents and some of the information we may not even know about. Students have approached me about particular types of psychology, and I had to go do a little research myself on this, but it also keeps us up on what the latest career opportunities are out there. Pathways to get there. Students ask questions to me like the GRE exam, which is the standard entrance exam to graduate school. What is that? How does it work? How do I prepare for that? Standard questions that they need to know. Other things that we frequently asked questions are only half of this. What are things that you wish, and this is every mentor can answer this question. What are things you wish you had known when you were sitting in that mentee chair? So when I'm sitting with a postdoctoral research scientist who's looking for their first job, what are things I would have liked to have known? I think any of us can sit down and write a manuscript about all the things we wish we knew when we were 21 in college or 31 early in our career, moving towards later in our career. We could all write that down. Do it. I encourage mentors, write it down, record it, and put it out there. Half of the questions come from the mentees because they know what questions they have. Other things they don't even know they need to know, and that comes from us. That's I hope no one feels uncomfortable with the metaphor of the parent and child. When parents raise their children and they know what the child needs to know, even if it's even if the child doesn't know it yet. We'll say, "You'll thank me later," right? Terrible parents will accidentally say that because you repeat what your parents told you. You'll thank me later. But it's darn true, isn't it? You'll thank me later for this information. We'll write it down. We'll write it down. They don't even know they need to know this. And we can all, back to where I started this conversation about empathy, back to when I was a mentee and I needed that advice. I heard it. I didn't understand it. But years later, now I understand why that was important, why I needed to hear that. I might have not received it well when somebody says things to me like, I went through my own anti-authoritarian phase, just like most of us, and said, well, I don't need that. I don't need to know that. Darn it, they were right. Turns out those older people, they were right. I did need to know that information. Half of the information comes from the students' questions. Half comes from things you would have liked to have known earlier.
You know what? One of the things that it seems to me a hidden benefit of that is I hear from mentors all the time that they aren't, when they're starting mentoring relationships or even in particularly challenging mentoring relationships, they don't necessarily know what it is that they have to add or what their own point of view is. And what a great gift to themselves and to their own legacy to think about, to take the time to think through these things so that they can, clarify it for themselves, leave the information for others, but also continue to use it as they go about their day to day.
Yes, absolutely. That empathy of saying, what would I have liked to have known? That's very, very important. It's it's like when we're speaking with, when a college student is speaking to a psychologist and saying, why did you decide to become this particular kind of psychologist? We have answers to this. We may not think about it very often, but writing that down is important self-reflection. I love that point you're making. It's an important self-reflection as well as information to share, because we're demonstrating to these usually younger mentees, the thought process. How did I arrive at understanding my place in the world, my purpose? I'll tell the story of how I discovered psychology. I started out as a computer science and engineering major when I was in college, and I probably would have made a lot more money, but I took this introduction to psychology class, and it fits so well as a science and a practice. It was intellectually fascinating. My mind loved it, and my heart loved it because I felt like it was meaningful and it was important. I was raised Christian. I was raised Catholic. I was raised to understand service is important. Our Lady of the Lake University, where I work at, uses the metaphor of the servant leader who goes out into the community and gives back to the community. And the field of psychology, telling the story to my mentees of how I discovered this was for me, ends by saying, what I wish for you is that you find a field that is intellectually interesting and fills your heart with meaning and purpose. And they get that. The story is an illustration of the process, and they leave my office with a thought-provoking framework on which to decide, what do I want to be when I grow up? That's such an important question, but explaining the process to them becomes part of the teaching experience, as well as a wonderful reflection for me. I always tear up when I tell that story.
That actually touches a special place for me too, a special place in my heart for me too, because I really believe in the power of storytelling and mentorship.
Yes.
And so often I think new mentors in particular are so worried about relaying knowledge that it does themselves a disservice, right? The idea is everybody has their stories, right? And owning your stories and knowing your stories is so much more powerful than just, here's how you get from point A to point B, because the way you do it and the way you share that is through stories. So I appreciate that so much. So John, before we hit record, you had made an important point that I think some folks who are watching this will be very interested in, which is this idea of self-care for mentors. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, mentors, we have enormous hearts, but not boundless energy. Um, and I think it's one of the reasons why the online platform recording your information, I jokingly say I'm not available 24/7, but my advice is because I'm one of those people who has hit a wall in my career years and years ago, where my desire to help exceeded my my energy and my abilities. I think when we want to help other people, I always go by the old rule: you can't give what you ain't got. I found an enormous number of students, in my world of students, approaching me because I was Mexican American. I looked like their uncle or their father, and they felt comfortable. They felt comfortable coming to Dr. Gomez and speaking Spanish, and I would struggle with my broken Spanish with them, but they appreciated still the familiarity. First generation students, low income students. I will tell the story in my classrooms that I am working at a university. I was born 2 miles away from that university on what we call on the south side of San Antonio, which is the poor side of town. That's what it was called back then. Actually, it's funny because it's still called the poor side of town. But I introduce myself to them in the classroom, and then they seek me out. And I love that. And that's why we all became mentors. But then another one comes, and another one comes, and another one comes, and another one comes. And as hard as mentors may try to put up our boundaries, we give a little piece of ourselves to each of these people, telling that story, tearing up when you tell those stories, and remember. And you think to yourself, as I sit with this person, there before the grace of God, go I. So grateful. Empathy costs energy. Empathy, we're so grateful that someone was there for us, and now I'm there for you. Well, what happens is it's fatiguing, it's tiring, and self-care becomes really important. I also have a full-time job besides mentoring, like everyone else. And then I come home and I need energy left over to feed the baby, to pick up the child, to do the homework, and all those other things. And you find yourself exhausted. And I reached that point. That's what I meant when I said I hit that wall, and realized I got to do this more efficiently. Everybody has a way of doing this, but what many people deal with self-care by cutting things out. I didn't want to cut out mentoring. I didn't want to stop doing this because it gives me so much. And I'm so grateful. This is how I give back to all of my mentors. I pay it forward. This is how I give back to them. It was too important to me to not be a part of my life. And that's what turned into the desire to record information, to share this, to establish the online platform so that the information is always out there. And I find I do reach an enormous amount of students. I do reach many, many more people than I could possibly reach in my office hours, in my time, and in my energy. When I was 32 years old and I was bouncing down the hallways of the university, like Tigger with lots of energy, and the kids were small and the kids were really little, I could handle it all. Well, I'm 52 now, and it's gotten more challenging, but I also have a lot more wisdom, and I want to share this. And this is why my current research is on recording our information online and making it available to students. That's where that comes from. You can't give what you ain't got. Take care of yourself and find an efficient way to share your information and have that large impact that I think all of us want to have, because we're so grateful that we received it.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. All right, last question for you, maybe, because I may think of another one. Last question for now. What should mentors know when they're working with college students who are ethnic minority, lower income, or first generation?
I think I've been at this for 20 years. And again, my background, I was raised in the neighborhoods where a lot of these kids, I don't mean that in a diminutive way, but where a lot of these kids are coming from. I understand the streets, I understand the neighborhoods, I introduce myself and tell those stories. But let's unpack what you just said. The ethnic minority, Mexican American in my world, is one thing. Lower income, another whole world of understanding. book on bridging differences, another whole world of understanding there. And then first generation, of course. Each of them is part of understanding the context. We're going full circle here. The context of understanding the mentee that you're dealing with. Working with ethnic minority students. Now, I'm Mexican American. I understand the culture well. But before I say that, before I go any further, really, really important when you're dealing with an ethnicity different from yourself, dealing with gender different from yourself, sexual orientation, disability different from yourself. This was the topic of my doctoral dissertation. Not everybody fits the what you read in the book. Just because you're a member of this social group doesn't mean you've had all those experiences. What all of that information, for those of you that are out there reading books on multiculturalism, that's wonderful, but those are frames of reference that you may encounter when you're dealing with somebody of a different ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability than yourself. You may encounter these things. It's important we not step forward and say, so you're like this, and then discover that we look really foolish for making what are called prejudice, stereotypes. These books, nobody calls it this. Nobody calls it this. I've been doing multicultural research for decades. But all these, what's in multicultural books are stereotypes. So it's important that we're very cautious. Understand the person. This is why I love the metaphor of the family culture. When I'm sitting down with a person, tell me about you. What's it like from where you're at as a woman, or as a person with a disability, or as a gay man, or if they're different from me, just tell me about you. I'll find some connections with what I read about homosexuality, what I read about disability, what I read about women, and what I read about African American. I'll find those connections in my own mind, but I really want to know you. I find it offensive for individuals to come to me and talk about Hispanic issues, assuming I know all those things and I am all those things. I'm John Gomez. You're most helpful to me by just allowing me to be me in that way. So and that's one of the three social factors that we talked about a moment ago. Ethnic minority status, that's one. Lower income. We have about 40 to 60%, it varies every 5 or 10 years, of low-income students. And the proxy most universities use is Pell Grant eligibility. Pell Grant only goes to the lowest income people. We have about 40 to 60% of people who are Pell Grant eligible. Now, what does that mean? That means that they're coming to college because they need a job. So when I talk about a master's degree, I have to not just say, well, if you'd like to pursue a master's degree, here's what you can do with it. I talk salaries, and I talk about job stability. I talk about job outlook, because everything I'm saying to this young person, they're going back to their low income household, family culture, and they have to tell mom and dad. Mom and dad have to understand why the student wants to pursue this master's degree. They're going to say, well, what does it pay? What is it? They care about money. Money's an issue. You know, they're going to graduate with school loans. They care about these things. I may aspire to get a Master of Fine Arts, which is a wonderful degree, and I know many people that have it, and that's great. You must know job outlook. You must know, is this a growth area? Is this a struggling area? How much am I going to make? Will I be able to pay off school loans? Because those are the things that we find traditional college students have to defend when they go home and explain to their parents their career goals. So I want to help them. I want to give them a script. I give them, quite literally, paper handouts that describe professions, and I always put on their salary information, job outlook information, the different kinds of things they can do with this, the tangible skills they'll gain, because they're turning around and telling their parents this. I find low-income households care much more about this than us who live in the metaphorical ivory tower. We need to be sensitive to the students' family culture. And lastly, first generation, of course. First generation really does bring me full circle. A lot of first generation students don't even know what questions to ask. I find we need to be much more, back where I started, assertive with first generation students. As a mentor in their life, I may be the only person who they can come to and ask questions about their career future. When I wanted to go to graduate school, I was the first person in my family to go to graduate school. I had others who had gone to college. I was blessed with I was not a first generation student. But when I turned around and talked about graduate school, everybody in my family was not helpful. My father has a bachelor's degree. My older brothers and sisters had bachelor's degrees. They could help me with college, but nobody could help me with graduate school, except to say, why do you want to do that? It's more work. It sounds hard. That's the kind of support I got back home. Um, it was the professors that were so important, and realizing that this, again, first generation students, they don't know the questions to ask, and they may not have anybody else. When we're mentoring them, when we're helping them, we're also giving them the words to turn around and explain to their families. We're giving them words that will respect their values, the reason they're pursuing college, and ideally, in the midst of all this, encouraging them to become the person that they wish to be, the person that we all as mentees are so grateful that a mentor said, oh, you can do much more than that. One quick story. I remember when I was applying to graduate school, I had chosen the 3 graduate schools I wanted to apply to, and they were the 3 in San Antonio, here in my hometown. I had never thought about leaving my hometown. My professor said to me, now that's how big my world was. My world was the highway that is a loop around our town. That's how big my world was. And I'll never forget this moment. She said, have you thought about Stanford University, California, Stanford University? And I said, where's that in San Antonio? I didn't know where it was. I just never imagined myself outside of the city limits of my town. Now, I was not first generation. I was not, I didn't have a worldview that I couldn't go home and talk to others about college. But there was a limitation in myself that I just never imagined myself being more and doing more in the world, that mentors can open up a world of possibilities of who you can become. And those, again, kind of the stories that remind me of why I do this, why I love working with students. So many students have no idea how amazing they can be until I tell them, you have no idea how amazing you can be.
You're opening
and you
up
see them light up.
for
You
them.
see them like, wow, nobody's ever told me that before. Exactly. That's why I'm in your life.
Yeah. You're just opening up possibility for them.
Yes.
It's really a beautiful thing. Really, really a beautiful thing. I love what you said about you're mentoring the person. You use some of the information that you know based on your experience and the research as sort of archetypical information that gives you some data points, but the student is the expert in his or her own life, and you let them, through their story, share that with you. And I think that's really super important and a great
and you
point.
discover they represent so many intersections of social groups that you may not have even thought of. Never occurred. I mean, we were, I shouldn't say surprised, but we have a lot of students, 18, 19, 20-year-old students. And when we started talking about graduate school and leaving, and they'll say, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do about my daughter. And I had no idea that this 20-year-old kid, forgive the word, had a kid. Now, I know this is not a common thing mentors talk about, but talk about responsibilities and how it changes this student's view of themselves when they have children. And it was unexpected. I remember talking to other faculty members about this and saying, wow, these college students with children have a very different way of looking at their life, and mentoring them was unique. And it all went back to family culture, specifics. The stereotypes and multicultural knowledge helped me, but understanding this specific, mentoring the person, mentoring the individual, as you said beautifully, Lisa, mentoring the individual is really where it all starts, and understanding what their world has to offer.
Absolutely.
We may never imagine that the student is working to make money because the family needs money.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm so fascinated with, John, about your work is, these online platforms aren't a substitute for the individual interaction, but they facilitate it to free you up in order to get to some of the meaty stuff.
Yes.
And I think that's really, really critical. So let me ask you, how can folks find you?
Well, at the end of this, you're going to put out some information, contact information for me, right? About how to reach me. Email, Google voicemail is fine if you'd like to call me. I'm at Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio, Texas. If you Google me, John Gomez, OLLU, you'll find me right away. Not John Gomez, the musical artist who's out of California, by the way. That's not me. But I'm always happy to talk to anybody about mentoring. I really, really love what the International Mentoring Association is doing and how mentors can help each other become better mentors. I think we energize each other when we talk to each other and share with each other individual stories, learn so much, things that we hadn't considered, and make us so much better at what we do, so we can turn around and pay that forward to our mentees.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts with us today. I know I learned a lot, lots of great takeaways, and I'm sure the folks who are watching this will as well. Really appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Thank you so much.